The galactic hegemony had, in their infinite wisdom and questionable taste, decided that the best way to determine a species' worthiness for civilization was to throw their representatives into a cage with something that could eat them in 12 different ways before breakfast, because nothing says diplomatic relations quite like watching someone get torn apart by an apex predator for the entertainment of beings who considered themselves sophisticated. The Nexus Arena floated in the void between star systems, a glittering monument to bureaucratic sadism disguised as cultural exchange. Its crystalline walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that shifted according to the crowd's bloodlust levels, currently registering somewhere between mildly aroused and practically salivating. Today's entertainment featured humanity's bid for recognition, and the gathered dignitaries could barely contain their amusement. After all, humans were the species that had somehow managed to survive on a death world by befriending wolves and convincing plants to grow where they wanted them to. Chancellor Vexthari lounged in her observation pod, her 6 eyes tracking the odds fluctuating on the betting boards. The hegemony had ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia through a simple philosophy. If you couldn't prove your species belonged among the stars, you belonged under someone else's boot. The humans have selected their champion, announced Arbitrator Kelnoth, his voice carrying the barely suppressed glee of someone about to witness a spectacular failure. Behold the representative of terror. The arena's central platform hummed to life, raising from the depths like a technological altar. The assembled crowd, a delightful mix of crystalline beings, metallic collectives, and things that defied both classification and several laws of physics, leaned forward in anticipation. This was going to be good. Ambassador Rain Volkov stood in the diplomatic gallery, his face a mask of carefully controlled terror. Beside him, Dr. Nix Hartwell clutched her datapad with the intensity of someone who had just realized their theoretical expertise was about to be tested against something with more teeth than a chainsaw factory. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Volkov whispered, not taking his eyes off the platform. "Theoretically," Hartwell replied, which was exactly the kind of confidence-inspiring response one hoped to hear before watching their species representative face certain death. The crowd's chatter died as the human emerged from the preparation chambers. Lyra Voss walked with the unhurried gait of someone who had either made peace with mortality or had seriously miscalculated the danger level of the situation. She wore standard arena gear, lightweight armor that would provide about as much protection as a stern warning, and carried herself with the kind of calm that made the aliens wonder if humans were naturally suicidal or just exceptionally stupid. Tribune Gorthmech, whose stonehide species had earned their place by literally headbutting their way through a pack of razor wolves, shook his massive head. Humans, they navigate space by pointing at stars and hoping for the best. What did they expect to accomplish here? Entertainment, suggested Envoy Luxandra, her ethereal form shimmering with anticipation. High Curator Zephyrin activated the arena's communication system, his voice booming across the chamber with the practiced enthusiasm of someone who had perfected the art of dramatic announcement. Honored representatives of the galaxy, witness now the trial of the human species. Their champion will face the ultimate test of worthiness, survival against the Vorthek Empire's most prized hunting beast. The crowd erupted in cheers, whistles, and several sounds that human ears weren't equipped to process. The Vorthak delegation sat in their reinforced viewing section, their predatory forms radiating the kind of smug satisfaction that came from knowing your species' contribution to the day's entertainment was going to leave a very memorable stain. Warlord Krexval leaned forward, his scarred hide gleaming under the arena lights. "Beastmaster Thuron, remind me, how many species has the Ravager consumed in these trials?" 17, my lord, Thuron replied with the pride of someone discussing their child's academic achievements. Each one providing unique flavors and textures. The crystalline hierarchy's representative was particularly crunchy. The Vorthak were the galaxy's undisputed apex predators, a species that had evolved in an environment where everything was either trying to eat you or already had. They had mastered the art of controlled violence, breeding creatures that could tear through starship hulls with the same ease most beings used to open snack containers. "Release the Ravager," commanded Zephyr, and the arena's subsonic hum shifted to a frequency that made several species' internal organs vibrate uncomfortably. The cage doors began their slow, theatrical opening, because if you were going to feed someone to a monster, you might as well make sure everyone got a good view of the process. The sound of scraping metal echoed through the chamber as the barriers retracted, revealing the darkness beyond. And from that darkness came the Ravager. The Ravager emerged like a nightmare given form and a particularly aggressive attitude. Its obsidian scales caught the arena lights and scattered them into prismatic fragments that painted the walls in shifting rainbows of impending doom. 6 legs carried its bulk with the fluid grace of something that had never encountered prey it couldn't catch, while its elongated head swiveled on a neck that could strike faster than most beings could think. But it was the eyes that truly sold the horror. Multifaceted clusters that tracked movement with the cold calculation of a predator that had never known failure. The Ravager's breathing created a sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe. "Magnificent," whispered Chancellor Vexthari, her multiple eyes tracking the creature's every movement. "Absolutely magnificent." The Ravager lowered its head, nostrils flaring as it caught the human's scent. Its pupils dilated, and the crowd held its collective breath. This was the moment, the instant when instinct would override everything else. Lyra stood perfectly still, watching the creature with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for particularly interesting lectures. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering something, and then did something that sent a ripple of confusion through the assembled dignitaries. She sat down, not in defeat, not in terror, but with the casual ease of someone settling in for a pleasant afternoon. She crossed her legs, rested her hands on her knees, and continued to watch the Ravager with an expression of mild interest. The crowd's confusion was palpable. This wasn't how these things were supposed to go. The script called for running, screaming, perhaps some creative begging for mercy. Sitting down and looking contemplative was definitely not in the playbook. The Ravager paused, its head tilting in a motion that mirrored the human's earlier gesture, its eyes focused on Lyra with renewed intensity, processing this unexpected development. The creature had been conditioned to respond to fear, to the flight instinct that drove prey to run. "What is she doing?" demanded Warlord Krexval, his voice carrying the tone of someone whose carefully planned entertainment was veering into uncharted territory. I'm not certain," admitted Beastmaster Thuron, his confidence wavering for the first time in decades. "The Ravager is confused." Indeed, the great predator was circling Lyra now, but not with the purposeful stalking motion they had expected. Its movements were cautious, almost hesitant, as if it were trying to solve a puzzle that didn't fit any of its known parameters. Dr. Nix Hartwell leaned forward in the diplomatic gallery, her scientific mind racing to process what she was witnessing. "She's not triggering its predatory response," she whispered to Ambassador Volkov. "She's making herself non-threatening." "Non-threatening," Volkov hissed back. "She's sitting in a cage with a creature that eats starships for breakfast." "Exactly," Hartwell said, her voice carrying the kind of excitement that academics got when their theories started proving themselves in the real world. "She's not behaving like prey." The Ravager completed another circle, its massive form moving with decreasing urgency. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as beings who had wagered significant resources on the duration of the human's survival began to realize that their calculations might have been somewhat optimistic. Lyra raised one hand slowly, palm facing outward. The gesture was so simple, so fundamentally non-aggressive, that it took the assembled dignitaries several seconds to process what they were seeing. "It's impossible," breathed Envoy Luxandra. "She's attempting to communicate with it." "It's a killing machine," protested Commander Brockshan. "It doesn't communicate, it consumes." But the Ravager was responding. Its head lowered fractionally, and the defensive ridge along its spine began to flatten. The creature was no longer in attack mode, it was in assessment mode, trying to understand what it was dealing with. Lyra began to speak, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustics. The words were in standard galactic, but her tone was something else entirely. Low, rhythmic, almost melodic. It was the kind of voice someone might use to calm a frightened animal, which, when you got right down to it, was exactly what she was doing. "Easy there, beautiful," she said, her words causing a ripple of disbelief through the crowd. "Nobody's going to hurt you. We're just going to sit here and get to know each other." The Vagadirth's breathing began to slow, its massive form settling into a more relaxed posture. The crowd's confusion was evolving into something approaching panic as they realized that their entertainment was transforming into something entirely different. "She's treating it like a pet," observed Tribune Gorthmek, his stone features betraying the first signs of genuine bewilderment. "A very large, very dangerous pet." "The Ravager is not a pet," snarled Warlord Krexval, his predatory instincts responding to the perceived threat to his species' reputation. "It is a perfect killing machine, bred for one purpose." "Then why?" asked Chancellor Vexthari, her voice carrying the cold precision of someone whose worldview was beginning to develop structural cracks. "Is it sitting down?" Because indeed, the Ravager had settled onto its haunches, its massive form lowering until it was roughly at eye level with the seated human. The creature's breathing had returned to normal, and its eyes had lost their predatory intensity, replaced by something that looked almost like curiosity. Lyra smiled, not the desperate grin of someone facing death, but the genuine expression of someone who had just confirmed a long-held suspicion. "There we go," she said, her voice carrying notes of satisfaction and approval. "You're not so different from the ones back home, are you?" The arena had fallen into complete silence. The betting pools had ceased their fluctuations, not because the odds had stabilized, but because the entire framework of the wager had become meaningless. This wasn't a trial by combat anymore, it was something unprecedented. Dr. Nix Hartwell was frantically taking notes, her scientific mind working overtime to document what was happening. "The behavioral patterns," she muttered to herself, "the pack dynamics, the territorial responses. She's reading it like a textbook." "How is this possible?" demanded Ambassador Volkov, his diplomatic training providing absolutely no framework for understanding what he was witnessing. "Because," Hartwell replied, her voice carrying the tone of someone who had just realized that their species' reputation for being harmless might have been somewhat misunderstood, "humans have been doing this for 40,000 years. Lyra extended her hand further, moving with the kind of deliberate slowness that spoke of extensive experience with dangerous creatures. The Ravager's eyes tracked the movement, its massive head tilting as it processed this new development. "That's it," Lyra said, her voice maintaining its calm, rhythmic quality. "Just like the wolves, just like the cats, just like every predator that ever decided humans were worth keeping around." The Ravager's head moved forward, drawn by some instinct that transcended its conditioning. The crowd held its collective breath as the creature's massive skull approached the human's outstretched hand, and then, in a moment that would be replayed in diplomatic archives for centuries to come, the Ravager allowed Lyra to touch it. The contact was brief, just a gentle brush of fingers against scales, but its impact was seismic. The assembled dignitaries sat in stunned silence as the galaxy's most feared predator leaned into the human's touch like an oversized house cat seeking attention. "Magnificent," Lyra said, her voice carrying genuine appreciation. "You're absolutely magnificent." The Ravager's response was a sound that defied classification. Part purr, part rumble, part mechanical vibration. It was the sound of a creature that had never been appreciated for anything other than its capacity for violence, discovering that someone found it worthy of admiration. Warlord Krexvel was on his feet, his massive form radiating the kind of rage that came from watching one's carefully constructed identity crumble in real time. "This is impossible," he roared. "The Ravager has never been tamed. It cannot be tamed." "Who said anything about taming?" Lyra asked, her attention never wavering from the creature before her. "This is about understanding, about recognizing that every predator is also somebody's child." She began to move, rising slowly from her seated position. The Ravager's eyes tracked her movement, but without the predatory intensity from before. Instead, there was something almost like trust in those multifaceted orbs. "Easy," Lyra said, her voice maintaining its soothing rhythm. "We're going to try something new." She took a step backward, then another. The Ravager's head followed her movement, its massive form shifting as it tracked her progress. The crowd watched in fascination as the creature's body language continued to evolve, moving from predatory assessment to something approaching companionship. "Come on," Lyra said, her voice carrying the kind of encouragement usually reserved for beloved pets. "Come with me." And the Ravager, the galaxy's most perfect killing machine, the apex predator that had consumed 17 species champions without hesitation, rose from its haunches and followed her. The arena erupted in chaos. Beings who had spent their entire lives understanding the universe according to certain fundamental rules suddenly found themselves in a reality where those rules no longer applied. The Vorthak delegation was in full uproar, their carefully maintained image of unstoppable predatory superiority cracking like thin ice under pressure. "Impossible!" Beastmaster Thuron was shouting, his voice carrying the hysteria of someone whose life's work had just been rendered obsolete. "The conditioning is absolute. The Ravager cannot be influenced." "Then explain," Chancellor Vexthari said, her voice carrying the cold precision of someone whose patience was wearing thin, "what we are witnessing." Because what they were witnessing was unprecedented. Lyra had begun to move in a pattern around the arena, and the Ravager was following her movements with the precision of a well-trained partner. Not stalking, not hunting, but following in the way that pack animals followed their leaders. "She's established dominance," Dr. Hartwell said, her voice carrying the wonder of someone watching theoretical concepts become reality. "Not through violence, but through understanding. She's speaking its language." "What language?" demanded Ambassador Volkov. "It's a killing machine. Pack dynamics," Hartwell replied, her scientific mind finally catching up with what her eyes were showing her. "Every predator species has them. The Ravager was bred for violence, but it still has the fundamental behavioral patterns of a social hunter. She's not fighting those patterns, she's working with them." Lyra had stopped moving, and the Ravager had positioned itself beside her, its massive form creating a living wall of scales and muscle. The creature's posture was relaxed, almost protective, as if it had found something worth guarding. "Sit," Lyra said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from absolute confidence. The Ravager sat. The arena fell silent again. The kind of silence that followed moments when the universe revealed that it had been hiding a joke that everyone was only now getting. The galaxy's most feared predator, the creature that had been bred and conditioned to kill without hesitation, was following commands from a human who had been in its presence for less than an hour. "This changes everything," whispered Envoy Luxandra, her ethereal form shimmering with the kind of excitement that came from witnessing history being made. "Stay," Lyra said, raising her hand in a gesture that was both command and request. The Ravager remained motionless, its eyes fixed on the human with the kind of attention that suggested it was waiting for the next instruction. Lyra walked to the center of the arena, the Ravager's gaze following her movement but its body remaining perfectly still. She turned to face the assembled dignitaries, and for the first time since entering the cage, she smiled with genuine amusement. "You wanted to see what humans could do," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustics. "Well, this is what we do. We make friends." The political implications hit the assembled representatives like a plasma bolt to the face. If humans could establish this kind of relationship with the galaxy's most feared predator, what did that say about their potential as allies? Or, more frighteningly, as enemies? Chancellor Vexthari was the first to recover, her multiple eyes focusing on the human with new intensity. "How?" she asked, her voice carrying the tone of someone who needed to understand before making any hasty decisions. "Practice," Lyra replied, her tone suggesting that the question itself was somewhat naive. "Humans have been working with predators since before we learned to make fire. We've been domesticating wolves, training cats, partnering with birds of prey. It's what we do." "But the Ravager is not a wolf," protested Warlord Krexvol, his voice carrying the desperation of someone watching their species' primary export lose its value. No, Lyra agreed, but it's still a predator, and every predator responds to the same basic principles: respect, understanding, and the recognition that cooperation is often more profitable than conflict. She gestured toward the Ravager, which had remained motionless throughout the exchange. Your people bred this creature for violence, but you forgot that violence is just one tool in a predator's arsenal. The most successful predators are the ones who know when to fight and when to make alliances. The crowd was beginning to understand that they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple trial by combat. This was a demonstration of capability that redefined humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy. "Come," Lyra said, her voice carrying the same gentle authority she had used throughout the encounter. The Ravager rose from its seated position and padded over to her, its massive form moving with the fluid grace of something that had found its purpose. The creature positioned itself beside the human, its head lowering until it was level with her shoulder. "Good," Lyra said, her hand moving to rest on the creature's scaled neck. "Very good." The Ravager's response was that same indefinable sound, part purr, part rumble, part mechanical vibration. It was the sound of a predator that had discovered something more satisfying than destruction: partnership. Tribune Gorthmek was shaking his massive head in disbelief. They turned a Vorthak killing machine into a pet. They actually turned it into a pet. "Not a pet," Dr. Hartwell corrected, her voice carrying the precision of someone who understood the distinction. "A partner. There's a difference." "What difference?" demanded Commander Brokan, his metallic form vibrating with confusion. "A pet serves," Hartwell explained, her scientific mind working to translate the concepts for beings who had never experienced them. "A partner chooses. The Ravager isn't following orders because it has to, it's following them because it wants to." The implications of this distinction were staggering. If humans could inspire voluntary cooperation from the galaxy's most feared predator, what did that suggest about their potential influence over other species? Chancellor Vexthari was processing the same calculations, her multiple eyes tracking the human and her unlikely companion with the intensity of someone whose entire strategic framework was being rewritten in real time. "What are your species' intentions?" she asked, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who was no longer certain they held the superior position. "The same as any other species," Lyra replied, her hand still resting on the Ravager's neck. "We want to survive, to thrive, to find our place in the galaxy. We just have different methods than most, and those methods are—" "Making friends," Lyra said, her smile carrying the kind of warmth that made several species representatives feel distinctly uncomfortable. "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you approach someone as a potential ally rather than a threat." The Ravager's head moved, nuzzling against Lyra's shoulder with the gentle affection of a creature that had found something worth protecting. The gesture was so fundamentally domestic that it sent ripples of cognitive dissonance through the assembled dignitaries. "This trial is concluded," announced Arbitrator Quelnoth, his voice carrying the tone of someone who wasn't entirely certain what had just happened, but knew it was significant. "And the result?" asked Ambassador Volkov, his diplomatic training finally kicking in despite the surreal nature of the situation. "The result," Chancellor Vexthari said, her voice carrying the weight of someone making a decision that would reshape galactic politics, "is that humanity has demonstrated capabilities that warrant immediate diplomatic recognition and full membership in the galactic hegemony." The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers, protests, and sounds that defied classification. The Vorthak delegation was in full chaos, their carefully maintained image of unstoppable predatory superiority having been thoroughly demolished by a human who had treated their ultimate weapon like a particularly large dog. "The betting pools," observed Envoy Luxandra, her ethereal form shimmering with what might have been amusement, "appear to be experiencing some difficulty in calculating payouts." Indeed, the betting boards had given up entirely, their displays showing only error messages and confused mathematical symbols. The odds calculators had not been programmed to handle the possibility of a predator choosing to cooperate with its supposed prey. Lyra began walking toward the arena's exit, the Ravager following beside her with the easy companionship of a creature that had found its place in the universe. The crowd parted before them, not out of fear, but out of a kind of awed respect that came from witnessing the impossible become routine. "Hold question," called out Warlord Krexval, his voice carrying the tone of someone whose worldview had been thoroughly shattered. "How did you know it would work?" Lyra paused, turning to face the Vorthak leader with an expression of mild surprise. "Because," she said, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating the obvious, "every predator is looking for the same thing. Someone who understands them." She reached up to scratch behind what might have been the Ravager's ear, if 12-foot-tall killing machines could be said to have ears. The creature's response was a sound of pure contentment, the kind of noise that suggested it had found exactly what it had been looking for. "The Ravager has spent its entire life being feared," Lyra continued, her voice carrying notes of genuine sympathy. "That's a lonely existence for any creature. Sometimes all anyone needs is someone who sees them as more than their reputation." The arena fell silent as the assembled dignitaries processed this statement. The idea that the galaxy's most feared predator might have been lonely was not something that had occurred to any of them. "So you befriended it," observed Chancellor Vexthari, her voice carrying the tone of someone who was still processing the implications. "I recognized it," Lyra corrected. "There's a difference." She turned back toward the exit, the Ravager falling into step beside her. The creature's massive form moved with the confidence of something that had found its purpose, and its eyes held the kind of contentment that came from finally being understood. "Where are you going?" asked Dr. Hartwell, her scientific mind already formulating dozens of questions about the behavioral mechanisms she had witnessed. "To find someone who can help me figure out what this magnificent creature likes to eat," Lyra replied, her voice carrying the practical tone of someone who had just acquired a very large, very hungry new friend. "Something tells me it's going to be expensive." The Ravager's response was that same indefinable sound of contentment, suggesting that it was less concerned with the logistics of feeding and more pleased with the prospect of having someone who cared about its dietary preferences. As they disappeared through the arena's exit, the assembled dignitaries sat in stunned silence, processing what they had witnessed. The galaxy's most feared predator was following a human around like a devoted companion. And the implications of this development were staggering. "Well," observed Tribune Gorthmeg, his stone features cracking into what might have been a smile, "I suppose we know who's going to be handling diplomatic relations with the Vorthak Empire, if there's a Vorthak Empire left to negotiate with," muttered Commander Brokshan, his metallic form vibrating with what might have been laughter. "Something tells me they're going to be very busy re-evaluating their entire approach to galactic politics." Chancellor Vexthari was already calculating the political ramifications of what had just occurred. If humans could inspire this kind of loyalty from the galaxy's most feared predator, what did that suggest about their potential as allies? Or, more importantly, about the consequences of treating them as enemies? "Send a message to the diplomatic corps," she ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just realized that the galaxy's power structure was about to undergo some significant revisions. "Inform them that humanity is to be granted full membership status immediately, with all associated rights and privileges." "And their requests for territorial assignments?" asked Arbitrator Qualnoth. "Approved," Vexthari replied without hesitation. "All of them. And while you're at it, send a message to our military advisors. I want to know everything there is to know about human capabilities." "Should we be concerned?" asked Envoy Luxandra, her ethereal form shimmering with uncertainty. "Concerned?" Vexthari's laugh carried the kind of irony that came from realizing that the galaxy's newest members had just demonstrated capabilities that none of them had anticipated. "My dear Envoy, we should be terrified, but more importantly, we should be very, very careful to make sure they remain friendly, because if there was one thing that the day's events had made abundantly clear, it was that humans had a talent for making friends with the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy, and that was either the best possible news for galactic peace or the most terrifying development in recent history." The arena began to empty, the assembled dignitaries departing with their worldviews significantly altered and their strategic calculations in complete disarray. The proving grounds of supremacy had witnessed many trials, but none quite like this one. In the depth of the arena, maintenance crews were already beginning the process of cleaning up after the day's events. But for the first time in the facility's history, there was no blood to wash away, no remains to dispose of, just the lingering scent of something that smelled suspiciously like friendship. And in the diplomatic quarters where humanity's representatives were finally beginning to process what had just occurred, Dr. Nix Hartwell was frantically updating her xenobiological notes, while Ambassador Rain Volkov tried to calculate how many trade agreements they were going to need to feed their new friend. Because when you made friends with the galaxy's most feared predator, you had to be prepared for the practical consequences, and something told them that the Ravager was going to have quite an appetite. The galaxy, it seemed, was about to learn what humans had known for millennia. Sometimes the most dangerous creatures make the best allies, if you just know how to ask nicely. And they laughed when she entered the cage. Now the predator follows her commands, and the galaxy is scrambling to figure out what that means for everyone else. It was, as these things often are, exactly what humanity had been hoping for all along.